What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, June 22nd, 2011, getting down there closer and closer to the 4th of July. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute here. A lot of stuff going on right now. Just before we went to airtime, there's been another fairly decent-sized earthquake near Japan, near Honshu, Japan. 6.7 is what they're reporting. No reports from Fukushima yet that there's been any damage, but Japan has just issued a tsunami alert. So it won't be as bad as the last one, but obviously some things are rocking and rolling around there. As a rule of thumb, seismologists figure that once you have a really big quake, you have a 50-50 chance of having an aftershock that is only 1 magnitude less. So somewhere out there in the distance, there's a good chance there's going to be a magnitude 8 quake, which is probably going to rattle things around quite a bit, and we're going to be keeping an eye on that one. Peeking through the webcam, Building 4 is still standing. I know that's the one everybody's worried about in the event of another quake, about Building 4 coming down. But it's still standing as of the last webcam thing I was looking at. Now then, we have a major storm has hit Chicago. The electricity is out for somewhere between 200,000 to maybe 250,000 people. They're saying repairs are going to take a while. Some people who've been hit with this storm have lost their electricity. It may be as long as 5 days to get their power back. So this is major, major, major. And, of course, as you heard on the news break, the levees near Minot have overtopped. They're sounding the sirens and saying, everybody get out. They weren't expecting it to happen this soon. The evacuations weren't complete, so everybody's scrambling and dealing with that. So it's just an ugly, ugly situation. And I'm starting to wonder, are the Mayans right? Is this when it all comes crashing down? Man, boy. Look at all these horrible things that are happening to us. Storms, tornadoes, flooding, fire, nuclear reactor problems down there in Nebraska and whatnot. If you're one of those people who thinks that God causes all things to happen, you got to look at all the bad stuff happening to the United States of America and realize that whoever told you all these wars in the Mideast were God's will were probably lying to you. Because you're not seeing this stuff happen to the countries we're supposed to be invading. There's no tornadoes ripping through Iran. There's no wildfires all over these other countries or flooding or anything. It's all happening here. So if you believe in divine intervention, then the big G is sending us a message that our nation is doing some bad things, and we ought to pay attention to that. We're going to go to the phones real quick. Clint in Las Vegas. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What's going on in your part of the world?
Oh, same old.
Clint, are you there?
Okay. I wanted to comment on the videos you've been putting up from RT on the banker thing that doesn't seem to hit our media. And it just seems like this revolution would be overnight if the people just knew that we don't have to have the IMF. We don't need to have the IMF loan us any money.
We don't even need the Federal Reserve.
We can simply
we need our own governments to start issuing the currency again. That's absolutely the situation. This whole debt-based currency experiment has failed miserably. It is time to bring an end to it.
And I just wanted to say that, I just wanted you to say it again because you say it every show, and I think you need to say it again, that the Federal Reserve, when they print $100, we owe them $100 to these private bankers, and plus interest that can never be paid at, and the alternative would be for us to simply print our own money out of nothing, interest-free, and when John Kennedy did that, he got his brains blown out.
Yep, took only 5 months for that to happen, and then the U.S. notes were pulled out of circulation. Abraham Lincoln did the same thing. Issuing the greenbacks to finance the war, and they worked so well at restoring the wealth and prosperity of ordinary citizens. Lincoln said he was going to keep them after the Civil War was over. Then that out-of-work actor shoots him, and Congress pulls the greenbacks out of circulation and delivers us bound hand foot back to the clutches of the private bankers. Now, it's interesting. Last night on the History International channel, they had this biography of Andrew Jackson, and they did touch on his battle with the Bank of the United States briefly, but it was rather interesting that the show sort of made it look like they were kind of implying that maybe Andrew Jackson was being unreasonable in his views about the Bank of the United States. Everything else was justified under the belief system of the time and his treatment of the Indians. Well, that's what everybody was doing, so it was okay. But when it got to his conflict with the Bank of the United States, the narration was kind of, well, Jackson felt that maybe the bank was corrupt, and he thought that maybe, and basically trying to pull back. And they didn't even include his famous Viper speech, which really indicated his reasons for wanting the bank to go down. And it just seems that even within History International, they're treading very lightly. They don't want to offend the bankers because, golly gee whiz, they'll cancel our credit cards, you know, and they'll take back the mortgage for History International. And that's the slavery. We're not held slaves by chains of steel. We're held slaves by chains of paper chains. That's all they are. And paper chains are easy to break. All it takes is the will to do it.
Did it touch on the attempted assassination of Andrew Jackson?
Yes, it did, and I was rather surprised. The gun they had in the assassin's hand is one of the ones I have in my black powder arsenal. And I was like, there's my gun, you know. So, anyway, yeah, real quick, got to wrap it up. I got a lot of stuff to talk about.
Okay, do you have a comment? I'm seeing the pictures on the Internet. Wow, they look compelling. The sinkholes. And I saw it on Prison Planet. 12 odd things that are going on, and it touched on the sinkholes that are happening.
Well, it's called geology.
Yeah,
it's called geology, and when you have underground hydration, yeah, these things are going to happen. Clint, got to let you go. We've got a guest on hour number 2, and I want to get through the news before we get to our guest here. So thank you very much. I do want to talk real briefly about. We're talking about the economic decline and where's all the money going, and I want to go back to Eisenhower's farewell address to the nation. And I'm going to want to read you a couple of paragraphs out of it because it's going to have bearing on the story that follows. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security more than the net income of all United States corporations. This was back when Eisenhower was in office. The situation is much worse now. So back to reading from his speech. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved, so is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. So Eisenhower was trying to warn us that the corruption, the sheer money power of all the money that was flowing through the defense establishment was a political force unto itself. And it seems like ever since then, we're always at war with somebody to justify taxing the American people to build new bombs and new weapons and all of this nonsense stuff, and it's incredibly expensive. So with that in mind, we link to this story today. Do you know that there is a pyramid in North Dakota? And it's not Egyptian, and it's not a tomb. It is a relic from something called the Safeguard Program. It was built in the 1960s, and the pyramid is actually a frame for large synthetic aperture radars to detect incoming missiles over North Dakota. And together with the radar were a whole bunch of underground silos that had surface-to-air missiles tipped with thermonuclear warheads. The idea was if the Russians were sending nuclear rockets down over the North Pole, over Canada, these interceptors would rise up and, guided by this radar, would basically set off their atomic bomb in the front of the other guy's atomic bomb so that they would miss their target. Of course, nobody stopped to realize that if you're setting off thermonuclear explosions over your own territory or over Canada, people are going to be very unhappy. So this facility was only in operation for 3 days. Years to develop, $6 billion in cost, and they shut it down after 3 days. And we're talking the 1960s when $1 billion was really a lot of money. Back in the 1960s, I bought my first car, a Volkswagen Beetle. I paid $100 for it. Today, it takes me pretty close to $100 to fill up my Xterra. And so back in the 1960s, when you're talking $1 billion, it's really a huge amount of money. And they poured $6 billion into this facility, and now it's just sitting there. And it's a blight on the landscape. They used it for 3 days, and they shut it down. I was exposed to military spending years and years ago when I was with NASA, and I couldn't believe it. And then later when I was with Robert Abel and Associates, we did this project for Martin Marietta. They spend money like they got fire hoses, and you and I are having to make do with eyedroppers. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over the last couple of days, you've probably been paying attention to this story where they're trying to find out where all of this money, this palleted money, these pallet plastic-wrapped bundles of cash that were sent into Iraq immediately following the invasion, where did it all go? And the story started out originally that there was something like $6 billion with a B that was unaccounted for. And, basically the cost of that radar facility in North Dakota. But $6 billion went missing. That's a lot of money. And then the story went up to, well, maybe it was 12, maybe it was even 18. And nobody seems to really know. And part of the problem is that apparently the Special Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction has been told by the New York Federal Reserve that they're not going to tell him how much money was printed up and put on those pallets and sent to Iraq. They're basically saying it's none of your business. We were told to send pallets of cash over there, and we did that, and if it got lost, that's not our problem, but we're not going to tell you how much went over there. And so we really cannot find out how much of this cash was stolen through corruption and graft, or how much was, wound up in the drug trade or used to finance terror around the world. Nobody knows where it went, and nobody knows how much there was to start with. Except, of course, that all of that money that's printed up represents a loan from the Federal Reserve to the United States government to be eventually repaid, plus compounding interest, in the labor of you, the serfs. And that's why this refusal by the Federal Reserve to say how much of this money they showered all over Iraq there was in the first place, because you're on the hook for that. Somewhere down the road, there's this aggregate total of all the money owed to the Federal Reserve by the United States government on behalf of the American people. And that total will be in there. They won't tell us which is which. They'll just say, well, you guys all owe us, blah, 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 trillions of dollars. So we own you, and we own your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren. So here's your slave stamp on the forehead, and thank you very much for all the business here. So moving right along here. Now, over there in Libya, things are not going well for the campaign to make Libya safe for a private central bank. Gaddafi is still basically in power. He's not budging. There seems to be a great deal of corruption going on in the so-called revolutionaries. They're the ones out there saying, yeah, give us a private bank. We'll do that. We'll do anything. Just, let us get in there and get our turn at the trough. And as you know, there's a big debate going on in Congress about defunding the war. There's the fact that Obama seems to be in violation of the War Powers Act, although Johns, Kerry, and McCain are attempting to retroactively indemnify him, which is actually a violation of the ex post facto clause in the Constitution. Italy today, though, basically has said, we changed our minds. This has got to come to an end. And Italy is a member of NATO. So this coalition, this monolithic multinational coalition is already starting to fall apart. China's already saying, get out of Libya, it's none of your business. And now Italy is saying it's time for this thing to come to an end. Obama has already gone way past the limitations of the original United Nations resolution. And he's trying to find some way that he can keep going. Do you understand that President Barack Obama has 4 official wars underway right now? I don't know how many it's going to take to qualify as a world war. Personally, I think we're there. And there are all these covert actions that are taking place in other nations, some of which we've heard rumors about, some of which we probably don't even know exist yet. But this thing is spreading. This cancer of war is spreading all across the world. And the United States is the big war tumor that is metastasizing all over the planet here. Now, meanwhile, here in the United States of America, do you remember the Project for the New American Century? Basically the home of the original neocon movement. They were the authors of documents like Rebuilding America's Defenses. PNAC stood for the Project for the New American Century, and their whole agenda was a new century of American militarism in order to basically make the rest of the world part of America's empire. And that seems to be what's underway right now. So the PNAC neocons are into the Congress right now saying, don't you dare touch that Libya funding. Don't you dare take our war away from us, because it's part of a bigger plan to simply conquer the world and raise our flag over everybody else's dead body. And they're still trying to frame it as, oh, we're liberating the Muslims and we're getting rid of Gaddafi. And, what they're getting rid of is the golden hour. We're going to go to the phones. John in California. Aloha, John. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. How's it going today? Thanks for taking the call. Gosh, I don't even know where to start. There's so much ridiculousness going on. Every single day we wake up and, turn on the TV or read the newspaper. I just wanted to comment quickly on the what you were reporting on about Iraq, about how all the money was basically just stolen and is missing. Nobody can account for it. It sort of reminded me of when we had Bernanke up there in front of the Senate, basically telling everybody to go pound sand. We're not telling you where the money is. We're the private central bank. We make the loans to you. It's not the other way around. We have the power. We have the control. And, we're not telling you what we did with the money. So, it's just another example of that. We also had, I believe it was Rumsfeld, the day before 9/11, announcing that there was $1.2 trillion unaccounted for. Guess who the comptroller of the Pentagon was? The Zionist Rabbi
Dov Zakheim.
I mean, we look at all these guys who was also a signer of the PNAC document, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, he
was.
I mean,
we want to know who did. If we want to know who did 9/11, if we want to know, who's behind all these wars, take a look at the guys who signed that document.
Definitely. All the name players are there. And I'll go you one better. Do you know what Dov Zakheim did before he was appointed comptroller of the Pentagon? He ran a company that
PTS. Exactly.
No, he ran a company that manufactured remote control equipment for large aircraft. That's what he did as a business before he became
I believe it was like PTS Technologies or something like that.
That may have been the name of it.
Yeah, it was something like that, but I was aware of that.
All right.
The second thing I wanted
John,
to
we got to take a break.
John,
we got to take a break. I'm sorry to cut you off. We got to take a break for commercials. And thank you very much for the phone call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking out the window. Looks like we got some heavy weather coming in here as well. So we'll keep the show going until the lightning strikes and the electricity goes out and the rest of that stuff here. Now, obviously, and this is no surprise to anybody, a record number of Americans want our troops out of Afghanistan. We've been in Afghanistan longer than we were in World War II, and our people want their children, their husbands, their wives, their brothers, their sisters, their nieces. They want them to come home. They want their kids to come home. They don't understand why we're in Afghanistan anyway. Bin Laden is dead, whether you believe he was killed on May 1st or if you know he actually died close to 10 years ago. It doesn't matter anymore. He's gone. Let's end this thing and bring it home. Why are we still in Afghanistan? Well, the answer is oil and opium. But most Americans don't think that's a really good reason to be losing our young people. Oil and opium. They want our kids to come on home here. Now, obviously, Obama, listening to the voters because we're coming up on an election season, he basically said, yes, I am, the surge in Afghanistan has worked. And I think we've heard that a couple of times before. And he's talking about basically bringing soldiers back from Afghanistan. Now, that's not quite the same thing as discharging them and letting them go home. He hasn't said that. He just says he's going to bring the troops back to the United States of America. He says they're going to come home. But that may mean coming home to barracks, not necessarily to their families. Why? They're getting ready to do a ground campaign in Libya, and behind all of that, what nobody wants you to pay attention to is they're cranking up for an attack on Syria. There are American warships off the coast of Syria right now. There are Turkish aircraft apparently doing border violations to try and goad them into something. And we've seen this before where they were talking about bringing soldiers out of one country, and then as soon as they were out, they said, oh, we're sorry, we got to put them in this other place over here. We got to send them to this other country. So Obama is going to wave around he's bringing soldiers home to kick off to his campaign for 2012. But in all probability, these soldiers are being rotated out of Afghanistan to make them available for Libya, Syria, and remember, Syria and Iran have a mutual defense treaty. When the United States or Israel attacks Syria, that will drag Iran into the war, which is, of course, what Israel has wanted all along. For the Americans to go and kill Iranians for them, just like they got the Americans to go kill the Iraqis for them. That's the game plan. Keep sending out the Americans to kill Israel's enemies until Israel's enemies are dead or America collapses. Then Israel will go to some other country, probably Canada, and say, you got to send your people to finish killing off all of our enemies. And that will be the end of that. Now, along the path to that whole situation, they're back to trying to claim that Iran is a nuclear threat. We have been down this road before. We went through this with Iraq, with George Bush saying, Saddam's got nuclear bombs. They're bad. They're bad. And he's out there pushing that whole situation. And you'd think, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And yet they're out there with the same thing. Oh, Iran is a nuclear threat. Now, the IAEA has been inspecting Iran's nuclear facilities because Iran has signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So has the United States. Israel, pointedly, has not. And Israel has been caught selling nuclear weapons to places like South Africa, which is exactly what the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. So Iran is playing by the rules and Israel is not. But remember, Iran is the bad guy. So the IAEA is in there, and Iran is building a power station, and that appears to be all that they're building. And we've been down that road before as well, because Israel was leading the hue and cry, claiming that Iraq's nuclear power station at Osirik concealed a clandestine nuclear weapons factory, just like the one they have at Dimona. Shh, don't tell anybody. So, following the invasion and conquest of Iraq, international experts, including the IAEA, examined the ruins of the power station at Osirik, and my goodness, all they found was a power station. Actually, the remains of the building are being used to grow mushrooms, but there was no bomb factory. So Israel's batting zero in calling these things, but they're out there screaming, Iran is building nuclear weapons, and there's no evidence for it at all. None whatsoever. So just in time to revive this whole Iranian nuclear threat story, there is a defector. A shadowy figure calls himself Beecham has contacted intelligence agencies in the West claiming he's got proof that Iran was sending money to a Swiss bank of 8 tons of gold to buy 3 missing American thermonuclear weapons. Now, this is a story they've played before. And it's a fairy tale, and there's no more proof of that. Remember when they were saying that Iraq was buying yellow cake processed uranium from Niger, and that turned out to be a forgery. And this story is nonsense because, obviously the propaganda is the U.S. government could bomb an American city using an American nuclear weapon, and this story is to say, Iran had it. Iran had one of these missing American nuclear bombs, and they've used it, and they've got 2 more. We've got to attack them before you've heard the story. Same stuff that Hitler did at Gleiwitz relative to Poland. Same thing that Roosevelt did following Pearl Harbor. We've got to attack them, and so forth and so on. I will grant you Japan really did attack Pearl Harbor, but they got suckered into it. And it was not a surprise attack. Roosevelt maneuvered them into it because he needed a means to trick the American people into war against Hitler. And if you ever study the history of World War II, you will discover almost immediately that even though the war supposedly started with the attack on Pearl Harbor, all the resources went into the war in Europe against Germany. And the Pacific War was left on idle until after the war in Europe was over. Then they went out and they basically gave the Pacific War the resources necessary to win, up to and including the atomic bomb. So it's another propaganda story. It's another hoax. Remember, truth is the first casualty of war. And they're just trying to convince you that Iran is a dangerous enemy so that you will throw your money and your children onto the designated target. But remember, history is against the propaganda because Iran became an Islamic republic in 1979. And from that day to this, they have not invaded another country. Israel can't make that same claim, and neither can the United States of America. So who is the real threat to world peace? It isn't Iran. And that is the history telling us that right there. Over here locally in the United States of America, Standard & Poor's is out there basically saying the United States is going to lose its AAA credit rating. Ooh, horror upon horrors. Unless Congress raises the debt ceiling and plunges you, the American taxpayer, even deeper into debt to the money junkies. Now, you and I, if we have maxed out our credit cards, okay, and we say, you know, if we ask for more credit, will you raise our credit rating? And, of course, the banks are going to say, no, of course not. You've maxed out your credit cards. You can't make your payments. We're going to lower your credit rating. But only in the United States government and only with the Federal Reserve can the U.S. government get out of its credit crunch by borrowing more money, plunging itself further into debt, and the credit rating agencies are going to say, yeehaw, that's a good thing. And it's all about slaving you further to the money junkies. Now, I know, and you know, that Congress ultimately is going to raise the debt ceiling because nobody wants to deal with the consequences of not raising the debt ceiling ahead of the 2012 elections. So everybody's going to be grandstanding and saying, oh, I stood for fiscal responsibility, and my opponent over there, you know, and the fight basically comes down to the same thing. The Republicans want cuts to spending, but no new taxes. The Democrats want taxes to go up. Either path is a path to destruction. We need a third way. We'll be right back after these commercials.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, over the last couple of days, we were talking about the TSA, everybody's most favorite government agency, second only to the IRS. Actually, I take that back. I think the IRS is more loved than the TSA right now. And we were talking about how the TSA were taking snow globes, little glass snowy thingies, and they were taking them because you can't have liquids on the airplane. But they had a specific ruling saying that you can take sex toys onto the airplane in your carry-on luggage, vibrators and whips and chains and whatever, all that stuff. Crunchy peanut butter, leather nighties, I don't know what they're talking about. But that was going to go on there. And we're all just really fed up with this whole groping thing, and now they're taking it into the bus stations and the train stations. They're going to have checkpoints set up. It's real Gestapo stuff. Your papers, please, you Schweinhund. It's for your own security, yeah. And they go on and have the shopping malls and everything like this. But at the same time, okay, you're going to love this. The United States has dropped their plans to ask shipping ports around the world to screen containers headed for United States ports. This is from the Homeland Security Chief, Janet Napolitano. She said, yeah, you don't need to x-ray them. You don't need to scan them and just put them on the boat and send them over here because, you know, Walmart's running low on inventory. And this is absurd because if there was a real terrorist out there, and not just these dime store phonies running around with towels they stole from Holiday Inn on their head, like Adam Perlman and the rest of that crew. If there were real terrorists out there, those containers are a great way to smuggle something into the country that ought not to be here. And Janet Napolitano has just said, you don't have to bother checking anymore. It's like our southern border. Who cares? Wide open, walk across with a nuclear bomb. We don't care. But by golly, we're going to go on putting our hands down the front of your trousers. Because that will remind you who's the boss in this country. And that will remind you that we're watching you every... Do you understand what's going on here? They're not worried about a threat from overseas. They're not worried about a threat walking across the border from Mexico. They're not worried about somebody in another country putting something in a container. They know there's no danger there. They're afraid of you. The United States government and Homeland Security and TSA are terrified of you, and they're treating you in accordance with that set of priorities. They're not worried about anybody else anywhere else in the world. They're worried about you. They're worried you're going to go Cairo on them. They're worried you're going to go Iceland on them. They're worried that this global revolution against the global banking cartel sooner or later has to come to the United States of America. And TSA's job is to keep you beaten down and emotionally repressed and too scared to stand up and say, this really stinks to high heaven. That's what their job is. They're not here for security. They're here to keep you beat down. They're the oppressive mechanism. They are the modern Gestapo. Or another person was writing an article saying they're the modern SA, the brown shirts. Brown shirts, blue shirts, the color really doesn't matter. It's the same thing. They are here to keep you too scared to stand up against the tyrant who is starting a world war to get out of his economic problems. That's what's going on here. And the fact that the TSA is spending all this money to go on groping Americans at the bus and train stations who are already inside the United States. They're not bringing something in. They're already here. And at the same time, they're saying, we don't need to bother scanning the containers. We don't need to worry about somebody walking something over the border from Mexico. Tells you that the goal of the Department of Homeland Security is not to protect the nation from an outside threat, is to protect the government from you, the American people. What their real goal and agenda is what they spend their money on, and they're spending their money keeping an eye on you. They are treating you like you are a terrorist suspect. Had another article come out from the Southern Poverty Law Center today where they're talking about lone wolf terrorists. That's the new label for anybody who doesn't like what the government is doing. You're a potential terrorist suspect. And once they use the word terror, the Bill of Rights no longer applies. The courts have already gone down that slippery slope. Obama can lock you up without a trial, without a lawyer, for as long as he feels like it, as long as he uses the T word in describing the case. Oh, he's a terrorist suspect. Put him away. Star Chamber all over again. The duck test applies. If it looks like a dictatorship, and it sounds like a dictatorship, and if it stinks to high heaven like a dictatorship, then it's a dictatorship. And that's where we are. Massive vote fraud and all. Alrighty. Let's see. Let me find something else here. I'm skipping around here a little bit because I want to clear the decks for this guest we have coming on in hour number 2. We're going to be talking about waters and water filtering, especially with all the flooding. Freshwater supplies are very much threatened. There's Fukushima. There's the situation in Nevada. And we're going to go into that. There's all kinds of stuff we've got to talk about there. Now, up in Chicago, as you know, they're having major financial problems. And I saw this article. And the headline was, Chicago taxpayers now on the hook for a staggering $108 billion for pension shortfall. More than $63,000 per family. This is a very subtle piece of propaganda. They're trying to convince you that the economic woes are caused by all the public workers' unions, by all the teachers, and by all the pension plans. Well, why are the pension plans having shortfalls? Because they invested in the mortgage-backed securities. Wall Street took that money and they lost it. Look what Goldman Sachs did to the Bank of Libya. They lost 90% of their investment capital. And I don't think they singled out Libya for that. That was the performance of all of these mortgage-backed securities. And the pensions invested in them because they were told, oh, these are AAA rated mortgage bundles, and you'll make a nice, long, steady return with them. And that's what the pensions wanted. And the pensions get burned. And now instead of saying, Wall Street really screwed over America, the media is saying, oh, it's those gosh darn pensioners. They're to blame for the poverty. They're to blame for the staggering tax bill. No, they're not. Because all those people who are owed pensions have been paying into the system through payroll deductions. It's like Social Security. It's not a gift from the government. It's your money. The government took it from you, supposedly to invest it wisely, and now they're supposed to pay it back. And they can't. Because Wall Street took it all and spent it on Bugattis and $120,000 wristwatches. And so now they're coming back and saying, well, you unfunded pensioners, you're the problem, and we've got to slap you around for that whole thing. By the way, the post office has stopped paying into their pension plan. So if you're working for the United States Post Office, the post office contribution to the plan, usually it's a shared thing. You put in so much, your employer puts in so much. Well, the employer's contribution to the post office pension plan has now been cut off. They simply don't have the money. So all you postal workers, please take a deep breath, put down the machine gun, don't do anything rash. because I'm still waiting for my Tony the Tiger ray guns, because I sent in those box tops like 47 years ago, and I'm still waiting for my Tony the Tiger ray gun. Alrighty, let's see. Executives over in China's central bank apparently stole $123 billion from their financial center. And they probably figured, Wall Street got away with it. Why are you picking on me? We're just doing what the Americans showed us how to do. China's going to show us what we should have done with the financial criminals of Wall Street. Because I'll tell you right now, those officials who stole those billions of dollars in China, they're not going to get the free pass that Wall Street's criminals got. And we need to pay very close attention to what happens to those bankers, because that is what should be happening to all of these bankers and investment people and these hotshot money junkies who screwed over the entire nation's economy just to put a few more gold coins in their pockets. Now, over in Europe, there's been a big legal fight over the expense accounts for the members of the European Parliament. The European Union has its own legislative body, the European Parliament, and the members of the Parliament have basically been fighting a bill to keep private how much money they spend on themselves as they run around doing whatever it is that they do. And apparently it has been quite a luxurious lifestyle on the back of Europe's taxpayers. And the justification, the rationale for not releasing this public information was that exposure of how much the members of the European Parliament were lavishing on themselves might undermine the credibility of trying to deal with the Eurozone debt crisis. Because if you have the legislators living lives of royalty on the backs of the taxpayer at the same time they're telling the taxpayers, you've got to make do with less so we can have more, that's not going to inspire public confidence. But there's been a big, huge lawsuit, a legal fight, and now the reports are going to be made public, and they're expecting a huge firestorm. Because nothing annoys a poor person more than a rich person saying, you got to live poorer. All around the world, we're hearing this cry for austerity, which is a fancy word for government-ordered poverty. And we continue to see that those screaming for you to make do with less so the bankers can have more are themselves living lives of luxury, all on your backs. Survey of the 50 states' economic performance has come out. Hawaii is 47th. We're right down there on the bottom. Thank you, TSA. Thank you a whole bunch. You have ruined our island paradise worse than 1,000 Osama bin Ladens could ever have done, even if he had been alive for the last 10 years. Doesn't get much worse than that here. Now, over at CNN, they have this contributor named Fareed Zakaria. And he's out there starting to fly test bubbles about, really the Constitution and its principles, they're out of date. We need to rewrite the Constitution so it suits the needs of the modern era. In other words, they want to take away what is left of the Constitution, what they have not already chopped to bits with the meat axe in the Bill of Rights. They basically want to take it and redeclare a whole new government. And I will tell you right now, it is not going to be a government for the benefit of the American people. This is the attempt to transition us into a completely new society without constitutional protections. This is the final step to take us over the threshold into an absolute, total fascist dictatorship, and CNN is out there waving the banner for it. Fortunately, hardly anybody watches CNN anymore, so maybe it's not such a big deal. And let's see. People are still talking about the situation in Nevada with that breach of the levee up higher. Well, we're going to keep an eye on that. We're going to take a break for news and commercials. We're going to be back here with our guest, Jeff Gleason, here after this break for commercials and news. And aloha, America. Welcome to our show, hour number 2. And joining us on the phone is Jeff Gleason from Directive21.com. And, Jeff, first of all, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me on, Mike. I really do appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Well, for those of you who were following our show when we were with the other network, who shall remain nameless, Jeff was a regular guest from time to time. And the reason I had him on the show then, and the reason I wanted to introduce him to our Rents audience here, there was this program on the History International channel last week called Prophets of Doom. I saved it on my DVR to go back and look at it. And one of the points they kept hitting really hard was that we are very much in danger because we take drinking water pretty much for granted. It's just always been there. We don't think much about it, and yet we know there are shortages of drinkable, clean water starting to appear around the world. We understand that one of the reasons that Libya is being invaded is that Gaddafi built this amazing water system that just, it's just a marvel of modern engineering. It's this huge aqueduct and collection system that brings the water in. We already know that the water that comes out of the tap is not always perfectly clean. We know there's pharmaceuticals in it. We understand they're putting fluoride in the water. Now they're finding out that fluoride in drinking water has absolutely no effect on tooth decay. And worse, it's actually causing neurological damage. That was a story we linked to whatreallyhappened.com just today, that fluoride in your drinking water is actually harming your nervous system. Maybe that's the reason why Americans can't seem to find that place of anger over what the government is doing to this country. But it's a real serious problem. And the thing in this program, Prophets of Doom, that really got my attention is they were talking about how, due to budgetary constraints and just the limits on the current infrastructure as the population grew, that they might have to lower the standards on the drinking water. And having seen how the EPA was playing with the safety standards for radiation after Fukushima, and they were playing with the standards for oil and chemicals in water after the Gulf, the idea that the standards for cleanliness and potability in our drinking water, they might just change the standards rather than fix the problem is a very real possibility. And they were talking about water coming out of your tap that might have a slight yellow or brown tint to it, but it's still kind of sort of okay to be drinking the water, even though there may be unprocessed waste products in there that they just don't have the money to get out there. And so this idea, I mean, we've seen entire civilizations collapse for lack of clean drinking water. The reason Saladin was able to defeat the Crusader armies was he knew where the water was and how to make sure that his soldiers had plenty of water as they moved around the territory. The Crusaders, they had to carry their water with them. As soon as they ran out, that's when Saladin would attack. Water is, if you don't have water, nothing else about society really matters at all. And so I wanted to get you on here to talk about your water filters. You're a sales representative for the Berkey water filters, and I wanted to find out exactly what it is that they can do, what they can protect people from, what they can't protect people from, what people should be most concerned about relative to the water that's coming out of that faucet.
Oh, no, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, there's so many things related to water. We were talking on the phone just personally, and you brought up a really, really good point. So many people, whether in preparation for the future or just in their daily lives, they're more worried about food, having food storage, having a gun, having, self-defense, having flashlights or lighting or electricity, a generator, whatever they're having in their prep. A lot of people don't put what you said to me was the number one, and I totally agree with you, which is the number one thing, which is water. You can go weeks without food, but you can't go but a few days, 3 days, without water. And so it's so essential to our living, us continually, us living, in other words, that people, I don't know why, maybe there's a big push for food storage in the world, but anyway, I love that. I can't remember the exact quote if you can remember, but you said, water is so vital to our existence. It's more powerful politically than a lot of the political. That was it. It was about the political issues. Everybody's all into the certain political issues, but they forget how important water is. Is that correct, Mike? You told me a quote.
Yeah, well, basically that's it. Water is ubiquitous. You turn on the faucet, and there it is, and we all do very much take it for granted, and it isn't until that faucet starts running out that you realize you're in a world of hurt there. And, having water storage will get you through a short period of having the plumbing not working. But if you're talking about a major societal disruption, then you're basically going to have to go out and find water wherever you may find it, in old tanks, in catch basins, running down the roof or, into the storm drains and whatnot. And that water is not going to be healthy to drink just as you get it from the ground. And so having some kind of a filtration system or purification, or if you have the fuel to it, boiling the water, it really is. It's something we just take for granted, and we ought not to, because if the systems all stop working, when the water runs out, that is basically the end of it.
No, and you remind me of just an instance that happened in Massachusetts. I believe it was January or February of 2010, so it's a little over a year now, a year and a half since then. but they had that situation where, I don't remember exactly which city it was in. It's been such a while since I remember reading the articles, but they went, I think, 3 to 5 days or longer without water, and everybody went to Walmart and just, whatever you call it, hoarded all the bottled water, and they had pictures of people with their cart full of bottled water. And I think if they would have just had a filtration system or another way to purify their water, that could have been negated. And so these kind of things, though they might not happen in where we live, they're happening in little spots all over the U.S. I mean, these stories are not rare, or they're happening all over the world. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, no, we had that situation out here when we had the big tsunami earlier this year, and of course last year we had the ripple, and everybody went right down to the store, and the shelves with the bottled water were just completely emptied out. And if you're in a part of the country, and right now the reason I wanted you on the show now is we're looking at all this flood damage all down from Montana, the Missouri River, down into Nebraska, and even setting aside the issue of possible damage to the nuclear power stations, you're looking at all of this contaminated water pouring into the water reclamation systems. There's a very real possibility that tap water is going to be less than healthy and clean coming right out of the faucet because they can't keep the flood water out of the processing plants. They're all getting overtopped. And so as a result, if you don't have some way to filter that water or purify it, you could make yourself very, very sick, but you can't stop drinking the water. So it's one of those things, and you're absolutely right. People will have an emergency preparation kit, and they'll have flashlights and food and all the rest of it, but they won't necessarily be stocked up on the water. And you do need a rather large amount of water to stay alive. And I forget the exact figure. Is it something like 3 gallons per person per day? Is that the accepted level?
Usually around 2 gallons per day. But if you think about it, what boggles my mind is how much water we actually use in a day on a regular basis. I mean, we can take a shower and use anywhere between 50 and 100 gallons. And we're talking about getting down to 2 gallons a day, 2 to 3 gallons a day. So usually, if you have some 55-gallon drums in your backyard or in your garage, and those, for your family member, you could do, 30 days, and say you have 5 people in your family, so you do the calculation in order to have 2 gallons a day for a whole month for those 5 people, and you probably have 8 or 10 of those drums sitting in your garage or whatever, but you probably use, one of those drums a day just by what you do, but you don't realize it until, something happens. And so that's all. Not to be a fearmonger or not like that. Just, we take it for granted. I mean, you can't stress it enough. Like, just go take a shower and, fill a 5-gallon bucket up probably in your shower while you're taking a shower, and you're probably going to go through at least 5 or 10 of those buckets. Easy. And you don't even know. You're just in the shower. You're like, whatever,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, good reason to, shower with your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, or in my case, my wife. That way you cut the water usage in half. But on a more serious note, of course, obviously in an emergency situation, you're going to have to sort of like make do with not necessarily washing every single day. And it will be a serious situation because, your stored water, if you're not really careful with it, it can become contaminated. Their organisms can get into it. There are all sorts of things that you can do to save it. But ultimately, in the event of a prolonged social disruption, you're going to have to basically be finding water from sources. Water that's trucked in may not be healthy. Water that you're finding, again, I find it absolutely amazing that we've seen so many places in the United States of America that are criminalizing having a rain barrel on your own property catching water off your own roof. And they say, no, that's our water. It's got to go into the ground and go through the processing plant. If you want water, you go to the faucet, which, of course, is enforcing dependency on the corporations and the infrastructure. I think everybody ought to have a rain barrel and be, and collecting water that way. But even if you're collecting water that way, it still has to be filtered a little bit. We got to take a break for commercials. Jeff, stick with us. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Jeff Gleason from Directive 21. We're talking about water filtration and the fact that most Americans are taking their supply of drinking water pretty much for granted. We've grown up. There's always a faucet nearby. There's always water at the turn of a valve. Now, I'm actually old enough to where I have spent time in a place with an old-style pump in the kitchen that you had to prime and you had to work at it to get the water up. But we're just so used to the water just always being there, and we don't realize that is going to be the most critical thing. Determining our ability to survive a social upset is whether we have access to drinking water or not. So, Jeff, tell us about these Berkey water filters. What are they made from? How do they work? What can they take out of the water? And more importantly, what are their limitations? What should we be looking at other solutions for, like the lithium they're talking about putting in our drinking water to keep us all calmed down and not revolting or anything like that?
No. Thanks again for having me on. I'm here on Justin TV, also just watching it in the chat room. But the Berkey water filters, I would first bring up the need. I mean, obviously we've talked a lot about the need. Whether you have a well water, a lot of people in the chat room mentioned well water. Whether you have the tap, we're talking about not necessarily trusting the tap, especially for cities that come out with there's E. coli this week, or there's Giardia this week, or they're, the higher level of, a city I lived in once, I think had chloroform once in the city. And so these scares can come up, or these alerts can come up. And so whether you have tap water, whether you have well, whether you're just getting in a lake or a stream, or you're on a camp out in a river, that kind of area, you're going to need something to have clean water. Yes, there might be some tap water nearby, but what if you needed to go and dip into a river or a lake? That's the kind of need that a lot of people are looking at. The Berkey filters are off-grid. I call them off-grid. They're gravity-fed water purification systems, so they do not need electricity, and they do not need or hook onto a pipe system like you'd say, like reverse osmosis. Not that those are not good or bad. It's just it serves a different genre, a different need.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can put them. A lot of people right now, if they're not in an emergency, they'll stick them on their counter. And I don't like drinking chlorine, so I'll purify my drinking water from my home. But if you're out and about, you can also, or in a foreign country, a lot of people take Berkey filters to foreign countries. And so that, to sum up what a Berkey filter is pretty much pour water in the top, goes through the two elements that are in there. They are one of the elements, or both of the elements are made of a carbon mesh, or carbon is a very, very strong way, or it absorbs a lot of contaminants. But there's also some other proprietary ingredients inside of the black. They can remove things like Giardia, E. coli, if it's in the water, especially chlorine. I know what my water's like before and after, and a lot of people might think, you know what, I don't need one of those unless an emergency, but just think about all the chlorine that you're drinking right now, that you have been, and I think it fits that niche where you should not only have it for an emergency, but even use it daily. So, and then like you said, you're talking about lithium and pharmaceutical drugs, and maybe one of the limits to a lot of systems is that testing still hasn't been done. So you bring up limits. Nothing in this world will filter everything of everything that I've ever heard of. So I mean, it's for pharmaceutical drugs, I can make, generic claims about how it removes certain types of pharmaceutical drugs or certain type of organic or inorganic materials, but nothing specific. But also radiation. We talked about Nebraska a little bit, and a lot of people during the Japanese earthquake were emailing me, I got to get a Berkey, I got to get something for the radiation. I'm like, you know what? Mm-hmm. I'm not going to get a sale because I lied to you and told you that it removes radiation. So,
but it will trap.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but it's not going to remove radiation per se, but the radiation generally is coming from particulates that are in the air and then eventually in the water, and the particulates are going to get trapped in the filtering system. So that might ultimately wind up where your filter element is itself radioactive and needs to be replaced, but better the filter element than you. And so I think if you're dealing with contamination where you've had like these fires of the spent fuel rods, and the smoke and the soot goes up in the air and it's radioactive, that's the kind of stuff that I think these filters will take out. I'm not an expert. I haven't tested it. But while we say that the filters will not affect radioactivity in the water, what we're really talking about are particulate contaminations that happen to be radioactive.
Yeah, and I remember hearing another, just a theory, nothing that I've been able to show, but a lady had written a book. I was talking with someone about water and how the radiation particles attach to sediment. And so
Yes.
if they're attached to sediment, then they're not going to go through any filter because those sediments are large, you know, and if they're attached to it, the filter, whether it be Berkey or whatever, that I know of will stop them in their tracks. But obviously a lot of people were, you know, really concerned about the radioactive material, and so that's one of the downsides. I mean, you've got to, you know, while there's like even pharmaceutical drugs, to start using pharmaceutical names in your testing, removing, you know, everybody can make generic claims, but to point out, you know, certain names of drugs would probably be using their copyright names against, you know, without their permission. So we might think we can talk about that.
I understand what you're saying, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why it's, go ahead.
Now, one advantage, obviously, to the gravity filters, and, you know, obviously this is like an order of magnitude more effective than your over-the-counter, you know, filters that go in the little plastic pitchers and whatnot, which are nice and they're better than nothing. But with the gravity-style filters, I think one of the things people really need to pay attention is they don't require electricity. So if you're dealing with a blackout situation, you know, the problem with reverse osmosis or even with distillation is that those are dependent on an electrical power supply, and if you don't have that, you know, again, better to go with something simple that kind of works standalone. We got to take another break. Jeff, stay with us. I'm going to keep you for one more segment, and we'll be back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Jeff from Directive21.com. We're talking about water filters, and in a larger sense, we're talking about being prepared for social upheavals. We understand that as the economy continues to deteriorate, the government is solving its financial shortfalls by cutting public spending because the money has to go to the wars, it has to go to Israel, it has to go to Wall Street. We're seeing police departments get cut back. People are having to buy guns to defend their own homes. Crime is going through the roof. I'm one of those kind of people who feel I'd rather have something and not need it than need it and not have it. My wife will tell you I have flashlights in every room, Swiss Army knives, all that kind of stuff, first aid kits all over the place. And obviously water filtration is one of those things that it's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. So, Jeff, would you tell everybody your website and where they can find out more information about your product line?
Hey, I appreciate it, Mike. Thanks again. I've been having fun in the chat. I just want to make one quick point about the Berkey systems. They can reduce the fluoride in the water. I know a couple people in the chat room have been making that point. Some people didn't know, but they can reduce it at least, albeit reduce it. But our website, you can visit us, is an easy way to get there is goberkey.com. That's GOBERKEY.com, or directive21.com, like Mike was saying. Or you can go even to whatreallyhappened.com and look for the banner. It's about third down. It talks about water. It says, is your glass half, what if your glass is empty? And it'll say LPC survival. And you can go there and click through on what really happened. A lot of you do every day, and I just really appreciate it and glad to support Mike and his work. And you can go there. You can either call us or email us. And there's an array. Obviously, the time right now we don't have, but there are about 7 different Berkey systems, depending on the size of your family, from just one person all the way up to a church group or, you know, a survival group, you could say, if you were to meet at a bug out location or something, or, you know, whatever. If you have a group, in other words, you can have a Berkey system for that many people, whether it be 10, 15 or more people. So, I just wanted to bring that up. Someone in the chat room had been asking if we ship to Europe, and we do. Just an FYI, I'll type it in the chat room. But those are them. You can, like I said, you can reach me. We do ship most of the countries in the world except Canada right now, as you know, because of Canada Post being, you know, at least Canada Post you can't ship. But like I said, you can reach us on goberkey.com or give us a call, and we'll be happy to help you get something that you would fit your needs, whether it be, like he's saying, in an emergency or just to have it, and you might not be using it, but at least you have it just in case you ever have to use it.
Yeah, very much so. And one final note, thank you very much for joining us on the air today. And just one final comment. If you're talking about freedom, if you're really committed to having a life that's free, the first step is to be prepared to live without a government, because government controls you by making you dependent on what the government will give you. Now, when the government is working for the people and its job is to provide clean water and clean power and communications, that is a mature republic. But when the government becomes so tyrannical that they use your dependence on their water and their power and their electricity to control you, that is tyranny. And like I said earlier in this interview, in a time when fresh water and clean water is becoming short, we see jurisdictions literally criminalizing having a rain barrel on your property. You're not allowed to catch the water that falls from the sky on your property. You must use the faucet. And that is part of that evidence of using water to control people, using food to control people. It's all part of that control mechanism. So the first step for freedom is to learn how to live without the government. And obviously clean water is very, very essential to that. Thanks an awful lot, Jeff. We're going to let you go here.
Thanks, Bob. Mike.
All right, have a good day. Phone lines are now open, 877-342-6673, 877-342-6673. Now, getting back to the situation in Nebraska with the nuclear power plants, we're starting to see news stories which appear to be a little more than attempts to reassure the public without actually paying attention to the reality of the situation on the ground. There was a story where they're saying, don't worry, the nuclear plant could be shut down in 3 seconds if something goes wrong. And they're talking about how, don't worry, we have off-site power that is keeping the cooling pumps running for the reactor core and the cooling pools. Well, the reactor can be shut down in 3 seconds if it's scrammed, which means shoving the control rods in there and just basically damping out the fission. But that really doesn't solve the problem because, as they've sort of tacitly acknowledged, you have decay processes going on inside the reactor core, and you still have decay processes going on generating heat in the spent fuel rods in the cooling pool. And if that building floods, it doesn't matter where the electricity is coming from, you're still going to have shorting out of the electrical system, feeding those pumps because they're not up on towers. So we're starting to see news stories which suggest they know there's a problem and they're already trying to calm people down, but we're not getting the straight story, which is exactly the problem that we had with the Gulf of Mexico oil disaster and Fukushima. We never get the straight dope from the government, and that's really what makes it more terrifying. When we know we're being lied to, it allows people to let their imaginations run wild and imagine the worst possible outcome. And as we saw with Fukushima, the worst possible outcome we imagined turned out to be exactly what had gone on. So we have to keep an eye on that. And, really, if you're in that area around those reactors, just really be sensitive. If you see the local government officials running, try and keep up. Now, Al Gore is back in the news. As you're probably aware, his first church of the global warming phenomenon is in dire shape. We've had 3 harsh winters in a row, record-setting cold temperatures. It was snowing in Colorado the day before the summer solstice. And the reason we have these record floods all over the Midwest is because of the record snowpack that fell this last winter. And so now Al Gore is coming out there saying the only climate problem that's out there is a climate of denial, and you're refusing to listen to Man, Bear, Pig, and all the rest of it. And so what he's really saying basically comes down to is that his deal with George W. Bush was that if Al Gore threw Florida in 2000, he could loot the American people with carbon tax for the rest of his life. And now he's angry that we're not playing along. But that's really what it comes down to, because at the end of the 2000 election, Al Gore did not have a whole heck of a lot of money, and all of a sudden he's a multimillionaire. Where do you think that money came from? It didn't just fall down out of the sky because he's a good person. They've got their little carbon credit brokerages already running in Europe, and it's making them incredibly, incredibly wealthy. As long as people believe in this global warming stuff, and now people are beginning to become heretics. We're global warming heretics. We froze this last winter. Obviously, the world is not getting warmer. And so Al Gore's out there trying to find some way that he can go on selling this because he doesn't want the free flow of your money into his pocket to stop. That's really what it comes down to. Now, on the subject of environmentalism, we were talking the other day about how a lot of the agenda of the environmental movement are not really thought all the way through. And we cited as our examples the ethanol debacle. which sounded really good on the news bites. Yes, if we make fuel out of plants that have taken carbon out of the air and we burn it and the carbon goes back and it will be carbon neutral. And, of course, that didn't really work out because they hadn't thought it all the way through. There's a new example of this lack of forethought. We'll tell you about it when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before I go any further on this, I'm already getting nasty emails on the situation. I want to clarify something. I absolutely think nature is wonderful, and I believe in the wise use of resources. And I recycle, and we should take care of our planet because we only get one. Okay? My issue here is that very often public concern with the environment is simply exploited for commercial gain, to sell you a product you otherwise might not buy, and in the end, all of the hype actually harms real environmental activism because the real environmentalists are having to deal with this backlash from all the junk that has been peddled under the name of green. And I can think of one good example. Years ago when I was working at the Harbor Court building here in Honolulu, and I had a little music player on my desk that required batteries, didn't have a little power cord that would go on the wall, and I'd go down to this little camera store on the ground floor called Rainbow Camera. It's not there anymore, sadly. And they had these batteries that they were carrying, and they were environmentally friendly batteries, and they didn't have the bad chemicals in there. And they were like about twice as expensive as normal batteries, but they were good for the environment, and so people were buying them. And you find out they're only about a quarter as good as regular batteries. So you were paying twice as much money for only 1/4 as much electricity, but you were supposed to go along with that because it was environmentally friendly. And then later on we found out they really weren't all that environmentally friendly anyway. It was just a label and a sticker. Same thing with the ethanol debacle. This whole idea of ethanol as a fuel was sold. They got tax credits, they got grants, they got all this funding to push this idea for a carbon-neutral ethanol-based fuel for cars. Only it didn't work out because when you added in the carbon footprint from trucking the plant matter around from the factory that did the conversion to the ethanol, it wasn't carbon neutral anymore. And because ethanol has much less chemical energy in it than gasoline, you had to buy and burn more of it to get the same amount of work out of your vehicle, paying more for actual less. And finally, as the Germans discovered rather unhappily, the soft parts of your car's fuel system, older cars, the new ones are designed to work with ethanol, but the older cars, pre-ethanol cars, the soft parts of the fuel system were not designed to work with these very tiny alcohol molecules. They were designed to work with these very long-chain hydrocarbons. And the alcohol began to dissolve the soft parts of the fuel system. So people were having to repair the fuel system on their car. Think about the carbon impact of all that manufacturing and shipping replacement parts all over the place to patch the holes in the fuel system. And ultimately, Germany wound up banning ethanol, just like they're banning nuclear power now. So we have all these situations. Everybody's talking about electric cars and how wonderful and environmentally friendly they are. Well, they aren't really because the electricity still has to come from someplace. Where's it coming from? Usually a coal or gas-fired, oil-fired power generating center. And more that's going to be the case because the nuclear power stations are starting to go away. And now it turns out that when you factor in the intense carbon footprint of the process to manufacture those high-tech batteries that make the cars work, it turns out to be more harmful to the environment than conventional cars on conventional petroleum-based fuels. So here's the new one that just came out today. The environmentalists have been trying to convince people to buy these dish soaps that are friendly to nature. They don't have bad chemicals. They're friendly to nature. And for dishwashers to use water that's not quite as hot because it's energy efficient and it's Energy Star and all the rest of that stuff. And now they're finding out that these dishwashers that do not get as hot as the old ones, and they're using these environmentally friendly soaps, are not killing the pathogens that grow in the remains of the food that are going down into the bottom of the dishwasher. There's a little spinner there called the macerator that chops it all up, and it's supposed to go down the drain, but it inevitably builds up around the gaskets and stuff, and you're getting this black mold that is growing on the inside of these dishwashers because the water is not hot enough to kill it, And the chemicals in the dish soap are friendly to nature, which includes those parts of nature that can cause disease and illness and death in human beings. And it's another case. We were sold all of this stuff under the name of environmentalism, and it doesn't work. It's not taking care of us human beings. And we have to be more important to ourselves than little bugs and little fish. And I love nature, but human beings have to come first. And it's just another example where environmentalism is used to sell you something that is nowhere near as good as the product you used to have. They're taking business away from the companies you used to do business with by screaming, they're not green, I'm greener than they are. And, you know, the Americans trot on over, I want to save the planet, so I'll buy batteries that cost twice as much and are only 1/4 as good, so that I can go home and say, I'm doing something wonderful for planet Earth. Whereas a better idea might be to go out to the parks and start picking up all the trash and litter that's out there, which is a really good way to really be environmentally conscious and green. And so everybody's talking about green this and green that, but where I came from, I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a farm in New Hampshire. Where I came from, green means immature, unprepared, uneducated, and that seems to be the hallmark of the environmental movement, at least as it appears in its commercialized manifestations. I want to read you a quote. You all know who Paul Watson is. He co-founded Greenpeace, and now he's down there with the Sea Shepherds, chasing the Japanese fleet around, doing a TV show about saving the whales. Going to be his last season. The Japanese have cut all subsidies for the whaling fleet because of the economic damage from Fukushima. So this is his last season. Paul Watson once said about the environmental movement and the perception of the public, it doesn't matter what is true. It only matters what people believe is true. It's all about perception, management, and selling a product, raising the money for his little TV show to go down there and chase the Japanese around. And yes, I don't like the fact that whales are being killed. I don't like any intelligent life form that is being killed. But you know something? You cannot find any sophisticated life form that doesn't live by killing other life forms. Do you think those hamburgers in the supermarket just sort of magically appear inside that white plastic? You know, there's an animal that had to die so that you can live, and that is unfortunately the way of nature. All life forms prey on other life forms. The only exception are these tiny phytoplanktons that can live directly off of sunlight, and they are not the most advanced life form on this planet. And it's just the way of the, and that's when you're a farm kid, you learn that. The stuff that you're growing, you are going to eat. And city kids often don't understand that, and some of the people in the environmental movement, they want to talk about saving the planet, and they forget they're supposed to be paying the most attention to saving ourselves. Do you know, we see all these TV shows or TV commercials about humane society and save the kittens and the puppies, and believe me, I feel for them. I love animals, and I don't like animal cruelty. But we have got kids who are going hungry in the United States of America. Should we not be paying more attention to them than abused kittens and puppies in the Humane Society? Now, as I mentioned on the other day on this show, the reason this stuff gets presented to you, environmentalism, abused kittens and abused puppies, is it gives Americans who might have an instinct to want to do something about how bad things are, it gives them something to do that is not a threat to the money junkies and the power junkies and the warmongers. You know, leave us alone about all this war stuff. Go off and worry about the clubbed baby seals or something. And a lot of people will go off and do that. I remember when I was still in Hollywood back in the 1990s, and I was trying to call attention to all of this government-sanctioned drug running, which eventually became known as the Iran-Contra scandal. And I remember seeing all the people around me in Hollywood. Everybody had to have a cause. It was a fashion statement, you know. And the causes were deadbeat dads and clubbed baby seals and environment this and nature that and all these other things. But nobody wanted to go near the real heavy-duty stories. They were afraid of the government. They were afraid of losing their nice, prestige, wealthy jobs in Hollywood. And so they would find a cause that they could use for publicity for themselves that didn't threaten the power structure. You know, these causes are approved for you to be concerned about because they don't threaten the war machine. But going back over here, ooh, bad, bad, bad people. And you can lose your job. We've seen that with Rosie O'Donnell. We saw that with I'm seeing his face and I can't even think of it. Charlie Sheen. We saw that with Charlie Sheen, how his career was absolutely vaporized when he started standing up and saying these things are wrong. And all the way back in COINTELPRO in the 1960s, Jean Seberg, very famous actress, and she was supporting civil rights at a time when the civil rights movement was calling attention to the fact that the draft seemed to somehow be putting most of the black kids out on the front lines of Vietnam and all the white kids in those rear echelon, safe, cushy job areas. And so the FBI planted a story in the LA Times that Jean Seberg was pregnant out of wedlock. She was married to a French diplomat, and they planted a story that she was fathering a child by one of the Black Panthers. Oh, horror, horrors! And it destroyed her career, and ultimately she committed suicide. And it was only because her husband was a French diplomat that he was able to get at the truth of the matter and get the FBI to basically issue an apology. And the FBI came out and said, "We're sorry. We won't do it again." And, of course, they have gone on doing it ever since then because to the FBI, playing dirty is a divine right. But these are the kind of things that go on, and, you know, the government loves to have these causes out there that you can feel good that you're doing something about, but they don't really affect the future of the world because they're just there to keep you out of the way. It's just like Shakespeare said in Henry V, keep busy, giddy minds. Give them a distraction. Give them bread and circuses. Give them gladiatorial games. Just don't let them pay attention to what the government is really doing, because if the people ever woke up and saw what the government is really doing, the revolution would happen tomorrow at sunrise. So, let's see. We already talked about the fluoride causing damage to the brain. Drink up, congresspeople. The U.S. State Department is warning Americans against taking part in the next international aid flotilla to Gaza. I have never in my life ever seen the American government so turn its back on its own citizens as they do at the behest of Israel. Israel doesn't want you. Please don't go there. They're going to hurt you, and we will do nothing about it. Because they did nothing about it last year. 19-year-old kid from New York, holding a camera. The Israelis shot him, wounded him, put him on the deck, kicked him, and then put 4 bullets into his head. What did our president do in response to this murder of an American citizen in international waters? Absolutely nothing. He went up to the UN and made excuses. Anyway, that's it for our show. I'm all cranked up here now. Now I got to turn off the microphone and calm down for a little bit. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Rents Radio Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical, and aloha, America.